All right, thanks for tuning in to another edition of the OFN Meeting Room on the Ourlads Football Network as we talk Minnesota Vikings football. As the Vikings selected 15 players in the NFL draft. We also have 4 players, rookie free agent signings to talk about. So 19 players that we're going to discuss in some fashion here on our OFN Meeting Room show as we welcome in new to the show, new to the network, Kyle Radke of Vikings Wire for USA Today. And Kyle, thanks a lot for talking to us about Minnesota Vikings football for the first time on the network.
No, I'm excited. I apologize for the hat. That the hair's a little long. Not being able to go out and get a haircut.
So your hair is a little long. Wait till you watch this video back. Yeah, see this. Check this hair out. You can't see it right now. You can't see me. But yeah, when you watch this replay, check my hair out. My hair has never been this long before.
Yeah, it's a crazy time. But no, I'm very glad to be on the show. First time. I'm excited.
Thank you very much for taking your time to talk to us, Kyle. I'll talk a little bit about your background, because anytime I have somebody on for the first time, I want to find out a little bit more about them. Not only are you a contributor for Vikings Wire at USA Today, but you also have a real cool job with the Minnesota Timberwolves.
I do, yeah. A digital content manager with the Timberwolves and Lynx. So a lot of fun, a lot of player interviews, stories, podcasts, YouTube videos that we manage. Same goes on the Link side as well. So it's been a lot of fun. I've been there for 5 or 6 years. And ironically, the summer before I got that job, I was an intern at USA Today. So it kind of came full circle, being able to help them out again for Vikings Wire and cover kind of 2 sports here in the metro area.
That's great. That must be, which is your favorite sport?
It's a good question. I think as a fan, probably football, because I think basketball being my day to day, I can be a little more fandom-ish with my Vikings job.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the right answer might be whoever's playing well.
Yeah, I
makes my job easier.
Yeah, I hear you. I know how that is. Okay. And by the way, so it doesn't. I usually ask this question. I like to ask the question because it doesn't necessarily mean that you work for the team, that they are your favorite teams, but that is the fact. These are your teams. You grew up in Minnesota?
Yeah, I did, about an hour and a half north of the Twin Cities. So yeah, these are my teams. And to come back home, I interned at USA Today for 3 or 4 months, and to be able to come back and work, for my teams in a way, I guess. Has been kind of a dream where I get paid to watch all the games now, which
awesome.
13-year-old Kaya would think that was pretty cool. So it's certainly a fun time.
You said that you worked for the USA Today. Is that to indicate that you were living somewhere outside of Minnesota with the USA Today job?
Yeah, I was in McLean, Virginia.
Okay. Is that their home office?
Where their where their offices are. And it's funny because everybody asks, how my time there during that summer was. And it was fun. My shift was 6 p.m. though, 6 p.m. until 2 a.m.
I like it.
Yep. So my mom, she was excited. She was like, "Are you going to find friends?" I didn't find any friends.
Yeah, who cares?
Nobody had those hours.
Yeah, I know. But who cares, right?
Yeah, but it was fun. So yeah, I think that summer though, there was actually I want to say there's 15 to 20 no hitters in baseball. So our 2 a.m. Night calls actually went into 3 or 4, but
okay.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, when you're getting started in the industry, I know, and you'll do anything. You don't care about the time, you don't care about the location, you don't care about the travel, especially if you get to work for professional teams, which is the ultimate goal. So
it is. Yeah.
You're living the life. All right, let's talk about these 15 players that were drafted. Did you think, knowing how many draft picks the Vikings had, did you think the Vikings were going to retain all this many picks? Was that their goal?
No, I don't think it was their goal, and I did not think that was going to happen. Rick Spielman will probably tell you differently. But, they went into the draft with, I think, 12 picks, and that was high. Spielman likes that number around 10. And then I think just the way the first round shook out, where there was some cornerbacks towards the end of the first round that Spielman felt confident with he could be there. He traded back and got another pick, and then on day 2 he was able to make a trade and end up with an extra fourth and a fifth. In the fact that the team had 15 picks this year, and they got 2 more picks for next year's draft, and that doesn't include the Bills picks from the Stephon Diggs trade, is pretty fascinating to me. So they're already at 10 for next year, and that doesn't include the comp picks that they'll probably get for guys like Trey Waynes, Mackenzie Alexander, Jaron Kearse. So you imagine they'll have 3 or 4 there. So I mean, without even getting started with another trade or anything, we're already looking at 14 picks for next year.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's how you do
which
it.
is good. And the argument is, like, how many of those 5th or 6th or 7th round picks, how valuable can they be?
Yeah.
And well, if you find a diamond in the rough or 2, they're extremely valuable. So no, I don't think that was their plan, but I think they're happy with how it played out.
Well, you know that if you do that 2 or 3 years in a row, that becomes troublesome, because now it just gets it's like just know, well, I'm just throwing picks away. But that's when you say, okay, now we feel like we've done a good job of replenishing the deepness of our roster. Now we can use 3 or 4 of these picks to move up and target specific players we want. So it's a great luxury to have.
It is, yeah. And I mean, we'll see, and we'll kind of talk about these picks as we go here. But like, is Justin Jefferson going to fill Stephon Diggs' shoes? Like, we know probably not. At least in the first year or 2. But to get those extra picks and to replenish the roster, which definitely needed replenishing. I mean, I think that's the best you could ask for.
Well, let's start with Jefferson, and I'll be looking here in the Ourlads draft guide for all the information on these players. So, but Jefferson, of course, he had a great couple of years at LSU. Didn't hear much about him in 2018 because the offense was just pretty bad. But of course, with Burrow as the Heisman winner and the team just went crazy winning the national championship, he became one of the top receivers. Now, Chase is going to comes out next year, most likely. He's probably end up top 10 pick, as good as he is. But Jefferson had a huge year as well. And he's a great route runner. And supposedly, because he worked in the slot with his route running skills at LSU, is that going to be his role with the Vikings?
I think there was some questions after whether or not he would play the slot, since Adam Thielen does a lot of his work there too. But I mean, with how the Vikings offense is, and it's going to be pretty much the same under Gary Kubiak as it was last season under Stefanski. These receivers move around a lot. I mean, Stephon Diggs can play a lot inside too, and we'll probably see that in Buffalo. But he's also a great deep threat on the outside. I don't think it matters where these guys are. If he's most comfortable inside, maybe the Vikings put him there right away. But there's going to be a lot of 2 tight end, 2 wide receiver sets where the slot might not be an option for him. That doesn't worry me too much. Okay. He's a great route runner. I think they'll figure it out.
And we're going to stick on offense and talk about the other 2 receivers the team drafted. And this is actually something that I noticed was a theme on, I'd say probably 3 separate positions. And what I mean by this is, for instance, the team drafted KJ Osborne in the 5th round, and then they signed Courtney Davis as a free agent. But if you look at the draft guide, Dan actually has Courtney Davis rated higher than KJ Osborne. So when I look at that, I'm a Vikings fan. I'm pretty happy. I think I got myself some pretty good depth at the receiver position, and maybe one of these 2 kids, can make the team, and hopefully in a couple of years be a pretty key part of the team. But talk a little bit about both Osborne and Davis and what they represent for the team.
Yeah, no, you're right. When I was watching the draft, when you're kind of doing work, you kind of miss a pick here and there. And also, I saw a report saying that the Vikings had reached out to Davis, and I was like, well, how would they reach out to him? He had to be drafted by somebody, and obviously to go undrafted for him, probably disappointing. But I think Minnesota gave him, some of the highest money as a guaranteed player.
Okay.
Can get. So, and I think if I read the reports right, they were kind of negotiating with Dallas as well. from Davis's camp. So it's a good get for Minnesota, and certainly they need depth at receiver, and that's kind of the thing. So Davis was a big time player that could have been a 5th or 6th round pick, and just how deep this draft was, it actually ended up hurting a lot of receivers. Where and especially how the first round went, which is kind of wonky. There were, I think, 5 receivers taken, but the receivers slid, and then there was a huge run on receivers. So not great for him to go undrafted, but I think he has a good chance to make the team given the position. I mean, you talk about, okay, the Vikings signed Tajay Sharp from Tennessee, and it's like, well, if you look at his contract, that's not super guaranteed contract. They could cut ties with him immediately for a younger player, and I actually think that's probably more likely. And then you go to somebody like Osborne. His big fit for this team, I really think. I don't know if it'll be at receiver right away. I actually think it'll probably be at kick returning and punt returning, because Marcus Sherrills, who the Vikings brought back last year, it sounds like his career is probably over. And then Mike Hughes was a player that they had as their kick returner and their punt returner.
Okay.
Hughes, he broke his vertebrae last season. He's probably going to be the #1 cornerback on this team. They probably don't want to risk having him back there. So, I know the kick returner and the punt returner, it's not as important as it once was, but I think that they found Osborne and they said, okay, this is a guy that can play receiver if we develop him correctly, but he's a guy that can probably step in right away and become a kick and punt returner.
Yeah, Osborne he was a really big stud out. Matter of fact, he had, what was that? I forget the other receiver from Buffalo, the kid Johnson, was their #1 receiver. Osborne, I think it was the #2 receiver, and Osborne grad transfer over to Miami. So anytime you can get guys like that, like you said, even if you have to spend a little bit of money to buy them. And by the way, was that interesting that you bring it up, because I hear about that a lot right after the draft. Was he then considered the top priority free agent in the class?
He had to be right up there. And it's actually interesting because it's something we deal with sometimes in the NBA too, where a player like Naz Reid, who went to LSU, and he was maybe projected as like a late 1st round, 2nd round pick. And we talked to him about how he ended up going undrafted. And once you reach a certain point, and I'm not sure if Davis felt this way, but I think once you reach a certain point, you kind of wonder if it's better to go undrafted.
Yeah.
So you can kind of pick your spot, because I'm guessing that the money's not much different. You can pick your spot and pick your opportunity. And I'm sure he looked at Minnesota's roster compared to maybe Dallas's, where they drafted the 1st round receiver and they already have Cooper. And he said, okay, there's Thielen and there's Jefferson, but after that, there's maybe not much. I think I can make an impact. So you just wonder if that comes into play, where if teams are calling his agent, he's like, yeah, maybe let's try to get him undrafted.
Absolutely. Happens all the time. Makes sense too. Okay, offensive line. And the team went out and spent their 2nd round pick on Ezra Cleveland. And they also added 3 other linemen, one in the 6th round, Blake Brandel. They also added Kyle Hinton from Washburn College in the 7th round. He's a guard. And Tyler Higbee as a free agent. And another situation where Higbee actually graded higher at our lads over Hinton, who was the 7th round draft pick. Not a surprise, though, of course, considering where Hinton went to school. But Cleveland is the big get, and then you would think the other 3 linemen are probably going to be nothing more than developmental practice squad players.
Yeah, the Cleveland pick was the one that Vikings fans were all kind of wondering what the team would do in the 2nd and 3rd round, because basically it was, if you take a tackle in the 2nd or 3rd round, you're saying the Trent Williams trade rumors are probably dead. And that's kind of exactly what happened. They went after Cleveland, and it was kind of Minnesota saying, okay, we're going to invest in him instead, which I think is probably the right move. Now, it's interesting because, the reports are saying from Gary Kubiak is saying that he could play tackle or guard. So if he plays guard, all of a sudden he's competing with Pat Elflein for maybe that left guard, and the right guard spot appears to be open. If he goes left tackle, you'll probably knock Riley Reef over to either one of the guard spots. So a lot of moving parts. And I think a lot of people say, okay, Minnesota's offense was a top 10 offense last year, but that doesn't necessarily indicate the offensive line was very good. I mean, the reason they had so much success was A, because of Dalvin Cook, and B, because of the play action game. They kind of had to work around the offensive line. As for the other guys, I think they're kind of, you're hoping to whether it's Brandel, Hinton, or Higbee, you're just hoping that one of these guys can come in and maybe claw. And I think last year with Drew Samia from, I think they took him in the fourth or fifth round. I think they were kind of hoping that he could be that guy right away. It sounds like he's going to compete for a starting guard spot this year. So I think with those guys late in the round, especially when you have 15 picks, I think you're honestly just kind of throwing darts at a wall.
Yeah.
And them, one of them can turn into a future starter. So especially with the offensive line spots, you never know how those guys are going to develop. You just hope you get lucky.
Yeah, Higbee to me is the most intriguing because you're playing for Michigan State, 3-year starter there. Taking a look at some of his top accomplishments, you're talking about somebody who was considered their top lineman, which is not a bad thing for that football program. He could play 4 different positions, even though Dan believes that center, the spot he didn't play, could be his best position based on his tools. So, he's an athletic player, a very smart player, basically a 5-for-1 player. He to me, he's an interesting player could actually, even though he wasn't drafted, I'd give him a decent long shot chance to even make the team.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because I don't think the Vikings are necessarily they're not married to the thought of Pat Elflein starting, because I think for the last 2 years he's been not great at all, and I think that's kind of why they're saying Cleveland could play either or, and I wouldn't necessarily say that Bradbury, who they took in the first round last year as a center, if they find a center that they think can make do, I don't think that they would hesitate on moving him over to a guard spot either. I think all options are on the table.
Yeah, and again, it's not all these guys are also going to be important that they're going to start, but if you can get somebody, especially somebody that is considered potentially a 5-for-1 player, they are much more valuable sometimes off the bench. So you can stick them. Any injuries happen all the time up front.
100%.
Yeah. And if you can say, hey, Tyler, play tackle this week. Hey, Tyler, play guard this week. Hey, Tyler, play center this week. That's very valuable. Okay. Let's go to defense, start on the defensive line. And they took 2 players. We'll start with the 2 defensive ends because DJ Woodham, who was a 4th-round pick, and Kenny Willekes, who was a 7th-round pick. It's another situation where even though they were drafted 3 rounds apart, the grades on our lads were extremely similar. So, and I think that does say a lot about the bargain of Kenny Willekes.
Yeah, and I think what the Vikings saw with that first pick with Woodham was just that, again, they had so many picks. And I think he's a guy that probably, when Spielman landed Danielle Hunter in the 3rd round from LSU, I think a lot of people said, okay, that's a reach. If you look at the physical characteristics and compare them between the 2 players, they're actually pretty similar. I think they're like both 6'5", 250, or, right around 250, 260. And when Hunter came into the league, I mean, he was so raw and obviously just a physical specimen. And I think the Vikings are hoping that they can, kind of turn Woodham into kind of that same player. The frustrating part there is, I think, if you're a Vikings fan, is that you're probably going to leave Everson Griffin, who said he's going to leave in free agency, he hasn't signed with the team yet. But you're like, why not get a player that could come in there and play right away in the draft? Because I think there's probably some of those players in the 3rd or 4th round that you could get that might not have the ceiling. So maybe a reach, but again, you have so many picks. I think it's worth going for that. And then you added in a 7th round, with Kenny from Michigan State, and he's a player. I mean, like I don't think it's crazy to say that he's more prepared to play than Woodham is, especially right away. So I don't think that that's a stretch at all, and I think there's a pretty good chance that all of a sudden when we get to training camp, especially with how shortened this offseason is, if all of a sudden you see him, leapfrog him on the depth chart, I think that's certainly possible. And I will say, having 15 players in a draft, and maybe this is crazy, and hopefully I'm wrong, but having 15 players in a draft where you're off season, you can't get into the specifics of the playbook and seeing the players as you might have been able to, getting them in the building. it might not have the payoffs right away in 2021,
Hmm.
like fans hope to see, or in 2020 rather. So something to keep an eye on. That some of these players might not progress as fast
Sure.
as they would have otherwise.
And by the way, Willikis also, I like what you got to love about him. You're talking about a walk on who it doesn't have those types of athletic tools that you're looking for, but you can kind of probably call him a lunch pail type player, a guy that took the hard, long road as a walk on and yet ended up as the Big Ten's 2018 Defensive Lineman of the Year. He had a career, 26 sacks, 229 tackles for a defensive lineman, which I just think is incredible. And he's is probably going to be a core special teams guy for the team, I would think. Uh, and he's just the type of players you need on your football team. You just know he's going
Yeah,
to give 110%, blue collar, all that. And if he made it that big at Michigan State as a walk on, I can just see him being that type of player where, because really, when you're drafted in the seventh round, it's almost like you're a walk on. So he's used to it.
yeah, those guys are so important. The guys that were never supposed to make it big. I think a lot of times you get in trouble when you're taking 6 and 7. This is more of a psychological thing. When you're taking those guys when they were, a 4 or 5 star prospect and they just don't work out in college, those players are more of a risk than these players that were never highly recruited. They walked on, they made a name for themselves, and they're still hungry because they still slid.
Yep.
So, yeah, those players are fun. Those are some, I think as football fans or a fan of any sport, kind of the underdog player because they're always hungry and they never stop.
Okay, defensive tackle James Lynch, a player who really took off. Matt Rule, as soon as Matt Rule got there, James Lynch took off. So no surprise there. The Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. He had 19 and a half tackles for loss, 13 and a half sacks. He also blocked a couple of kicks for good measure. But this is, again, another player that is athletically limited, but he's a big, strong kid. And you can play defensive tackle, the interior. You're nearly 300 pounds and come up with that much production. You're doing something right.
Yeah, and I think you look at the Vikings checklist on positions of need, and like defensive tackle was right up there. They did sign Michael Pierce, but Shamar Stephen has just been. It seems like the team likes him more than the tape shows, and
Yeah,
more than
right.
like any sort of grades. You look at him play, and you're like, "Am I missing
Yeah,
something?"
right.
And that the contract they gave him was kind of wild. So I think if you're a Vikings fan, you hope that Lynch can come in there and compete for that job. He's thick, he's super tough. He's a guy that's not afraid to get dirty. And the important thing here is that he's a guy that can also rush the passer, which the Vikings just that's kind of the missing thing. Well, Linval Joseph kind of had that right
Yep.
away. In the last few years, he missed that, and that's something Pierce doesn't really have at all. More of a run stopper, and Shamar Stephen does not have that either. So you think with Lynch that he can get after the quarterback, and maybe having Pierce there can free him up. And again, you get excited when you see these guys, and you go, okay, well, they're not going to become instant starters, but I actually do think defensive tackle is where you could whether it's Lynch, whether it's somebody like Jaleel Johnson, whether it actually ends up being Shamar Stephen. I mean, I think they could go in a lot of different directions here. So I like this pick a lot. Mostly because of the position need, and because you look at him and you go, okay, well, he can pass the rush or rush the passer. That's something that we haven't had in a little while, and adds a different dynamic.
Okay, linebacker Troy Dye was taken in round 4, 4-year starter who led the team in tackles all 4 years. So that's really he's not one of these guys that is not going to create a lot of plays behind the line of scrimmage, but he's just a really good uh, competitive guy that you can count on to make the right tackles, and somebody that is just going to play like a glamorous a non-glamour position, but somebody that you desperately need, every team needs, especially inside at linebacker.
Yeah, for sure. And he's a player that what I like most about him is he going to come in and be an instant impact player? Maybe not. I think he'll probably play some special teams, but he is a player that if you have him in on first and second down, he'll be fine. Like most inside linebackers would be. But the thing that separates him, I think, he has the athletic ability to play on third downs as well. So I mean, that could be a spot for him where if there's a running back, and obviously running backs in the NFL are a little bit different and they're quicker in the way offenses work, but it seems like he does have that speed in the range where he can cover those players, because if there has been a weakness, and Eric Kendricks has certainly improved on it through the years, but linebackers in general, when you have to guard or cover a running back or an athletic tight end, you kind of get lost. He seems like that might be his strength. Like you said, I don't think he's going to make a lot of huge plays deep in the backfield or be a guy that's coming off the edge or blitzing up the middle. But I do think he'll be solid. For some reason, when watching him a little bit, it seems like he gets knocked off balance. So in between the tackles, how good is he going to be? He seems more of like the sideline to sideline guy.
Yeah.
But again, right away for special teams, I think he'll be fine, and I think he has the athletic ability to guard some of the quicker players.
Okay. In the secondary, we'll start with the other first-round draft pick, Jeff Gladney, and once again, another situation where if you take a look at the grades at our lads, the pick for Minnesota in round 3, Cameron Dantzler, actually had a little bit of a higher grade than Jeff Gladney. Matter of fact, hearing everything about Gladney, there was a lot of talk about Atlanta, and it just seemed like Gladney was going to be a first-round draft pick, whether it was Atlanta or not. There was just talk of, either, but for whatever reason, our lads had Gladney graded a little bit lower than apparently most of the other national media did. So we'll see how it pans out. But again, another good situation. You always got to look at the positives of something like that. And the positive is you're able to get a player like Cameron Dantzler to go along with Gladney.
Yeah, I was confused on Dantzler's slide in the draft. With Gladney to start, I think 5'10". I think he's probably going to start immediately.
He better.
Yeah, right. I mean, opposite of Mike Hughes, maybe Holton Hill or Chris Boyd play a little bit too. But I think with Gladney, I don't want to fall for the post-draft talk too much, because I think a lot of times when you say, okay, I'm really excited to play for this team, or I'm really excited to play for this coach, well, of course, you have to say that.
Yeah.
But I will say that, I think that he's going to embrace Mike Zimmer's coaching, where I think while Xavier Rhodes certainly had his moments in Minnesota, and he was a top cornerback for 2 or 3 years, I think he was somewhat sensitive, and I think with Gladney coming from TCU, I think the coaching was a little tougher there with Gary Patterson, and I think Mike Zimmer kind of reflects that as well. So good pick overall. With the third round pick now, I was confused because with Cam Dantzler, like the big confusion was, or the big concern was, he's going to be skinny. He needs to add weight, but if he adds weight, he'll turn into one of the better corners in this draft. And to me, that just seemed like, well, that seems like an easy thing to fix. You hope that if a player's invested, he's going to, put weight on and whatnot. And,
but he's already a 4'6" guy.
Yeah,
so if you put up weight, then you're talking maybe a safety's role.
And maybe he plays like that hybrid.
Possibly.
But,
yep.
Yeah. And like Justin Jefferson said after the draft that he thought he liked the pick, which what does that mean, right? But I think that he's gonna be fine. Whether or not he can, I mean, he has the athletic ability and those long arms. But that is a good point. So you add on weight. We've seen some of those players you lose some of that athleticism, but I think to get him in the third round, I think that was a steal, especially for a team that needed cornerback help so badly.
And I think the one thing I did notice, both players are actually both really good at coming off the corner, blitzing as corners, as DBs. And that's something that certain defensive coordinators really like out of their corners. So very interesting that both corners, Dantzler and Gladney, are good at that. Okay, then, and this is no surprise that the Vikings had a ton of DBs out of this draft, because we know how much Zimmer loves his DBs. But sticking with corner, they added Harrison Hand in the 5th round, and then free agent Neville Clark Uh, and we could also kind of add Miles Dorn here too, because Dorn is kind of considered, corner slash maybe free safety. And then the team added Metellus, a safety, and Brian Cole, another safety, in round 6 and 7. So a ton of more players. Talk about, I guess, out of those guys, Hand is the one that was drafted the highest in the 5th round. Any of those guys you think maybe just for whatever reason fits best with the team, or you think was a better pick or signing?
It's honestly, it's tough to say. I think with all these guys, that they're brought in for different reasons. I think for a lot of it, it's just depth right now because I think, and I think a lot of these guys, especially in the 5th and 6th and 7th round, where and Spielman said this after the draft that for a lot of these guys, he didn't want to meet with teams on to sign them in free agency. So, where you take a guy in the 6th or 7th round that probably would slide to free agency just because you don't want to compete. I think Hand is interesting because I think he probably projects more as a safety than he does a corner. And I know Spielman said before the draft the team set at safety, and you have Smith and you have Anthony Harris there. But I mean, as far as depth goes, I don't think it certainly hurts to get these guys in there. So I honestly think those top 2 picks with Dantzler and Gladney, you throw them out right away, and I think those are going to be your instant guys. And then I think because even like with Chris Boyd last year, a lot of people didn't know if he was going to make the team, and all of a sudden, from everything we've heard this offseason, he's made a great impression on the team, and he can contribute, and as a 6th-round pick. So
absolutely, who actually had talent to be a lot higher of a pick in general. He I think going into his final season, he was probably looked at as a 2nd or 3rd round guy, and he just didn't. I don't know whether it was the combine or whatever, but his grades he really slid down. And this is what happens, like you said. Sometimes you just we also have to. We always forget these are the kids. And we don't know what goes on in their personal lives. There's coaching changes. There's so many different variables that go on here. That's why good coaching, good scouting comes into play, where you can see, you know what, we're gonna take a gamble on this guy in the 6th round. He may not have played good last year, or he didn't maybe test well, but get him into our system, and I can coach this guy into the player and get the best out of him.
Yeah, there's not a defensive back that Mike Zimmer's met that he doesn't think he can coach. I mean, it is funny with Boyd and like Holton Hill, who were really good friends, that, Boyd seems like a Zimmer favorite where Hill is, always in the doghouse by his own doing. But I just wonder what those conversations are like between those two about Coach Zimmer.
All right. So in general, fans excited about the draft? I can't imagine they weren't when you get 15 players.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably some mixed emotions. I think, yes, I think, on day 1 and day 2, I think fans were very excited. I think there was probably some confusion on why, the Vikings drafted 15 players. I don't think that was the plan. I think ideally, you're probably looking at 10 to 12. But like we said at the beginning of this, you get draft picks for next year. You get, like if you want to make a trade this year where, making a trade for like Kerr Vedvik last year, looked horrible because you gave him a 5th-round pick. Trades like that, you can take chances when you have all this draft capital. So, will the team be better in 2020 than they were in 2019? If I had to guess, I would say probably not. But the defensive backfield was probably the biggest weakness on the team, and it certainly doesn't seem like it can be any worse. And those players are certainly going to go through their growing pains. But to be as bad as Xavier Rhodes was last year, I don't think that's going to happen. And Trey Waynes, the deal he got in Cincinnati was just completely baffling to me after watching him for the last 4 or 5 years in Minnesota. So yeah, I think it's a fresh start, and I think fans should be excited for it because Spielman was able to stay competitive with this Vikings team, given the circumstances of how many players left.
All right, Kyle, thanks a lot for going over the Vikings draft and being a part of the Our Football Network for the first time. And again, anybody out there, any Viking fans, they could check you out over at Vikings Wire at USA Today. What else you got working? You have a podcast as well?
Yeah, so if you go over to Vikings Wire, there's articles up daily. Jack White, Jack Day, and myself. Obviously, a slower time, but plenty of news. About 8 to 10 new articles a day over there. And then over at the Timberwolves, I got a podcast, the Layup Line. If you're a basketball fan, you can subscribe to that. Just kind of waiting to see when a season will resume or
Yes.
playoffs. So kind of like we all are in sports land, just kind of just waiting. Obviously, health is the main concern. So, we're just waiting everything out.
Yeah, it's time. It's time. We all know it's time. It's just some of the politicians don't know, but we all know it's time. We got to get back to work, back to sports, and then we got to get our hair cut. That's important too.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, and by the way, don't forget everybody. Draft. Not only is the guide still a good buy right now because now you know who again, especially if you're a Vikings fan, because you have 19 players in this draft guide that profiles. So if you're a Vikings fan and you think that its draft is over, so I missed out on the guide, well, don't be silly. Get the draft guide. You could also get the draft review guide that's coming out in about a month. We'll be promoting that as well. And Kyle, thanks a lot for this first show. We'll look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You got it.